This year's NFL draft. His name is Rob Paul. He's Bobby Football on Twitter, which is just the best. But Rob__Paul. He's with Sportsbook Review, and he's on your radio right now on the Farm Bureau guest line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team. Thank you for coming on again. I imagine that you've been busy, but you're about to get a whole heck of a lot busier.
Much more busy, especially talking Ole Miss football. You guys have potentially double-digit guys getting drafted this year, which I think pretty incredible.
So let's start there and start at the most obvious, the quarterback position. Now, there was let's just call it weird reporting last week about Jaxson Dart considering a return. That was not going to happen. He's going to the Senior Bowl. He has shot up some draft boards already. I mean, if Mel Kiper's got him at QB3 right now. As you've gone through your evaluations, where do you see him fitting, and how important is the Senior Bowl and that to his ultimate selection status?
Well, with this quarterback class as a whole, it's nothing near what we had last year, right? So, although I think pretty firmly Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are the top two, that QB3 battle is wide open, and I think Jaxson Dart is firmly in it. And like you said, Kiper has him right there. So I think the Senior Bowl is really where we're going to get some separation this year, more so than in years past. Especially with a guy like Dart, I think he'll kind of thrive in that setting because his big thing is he just doesn't have any one trait that is jaw-dropping. Like you look at Jalen Milroe, who's just a freak athlete, but consistency is a huge issue. Accuracy is a huge issue. You look at Dart, he kind of checks all the boxes. He just doesn't go that extra mile in any one category. But at a place like the Senior Bowl, where you just want to see that consistency, especially with the quarterbacks who are throwing to a whole new crop of receivers, and generally they struggle, I think he's going to look pretty good there. And I think he could really separate himself as that QB3 over a Jalen Milroe, over a Quinn Ewers, over a Dylan Gabriel.
And Rob, I don't know that I can't remember the last time anyway that we've had the supply and demand issue at quarterback that we're going to have in this draft, and that you got a bunch of teams that would love to get a quarterback, but there's not a lot of great ones out there. Where does Dart fall in the draft if he is QB3? What would be the selection where you might see him go?
I don't think we'll get more than 2 quarterbacks drafted in the first round this year, because I even think
what a change.
I think Ward and Sanders are potentially going to be both top 10 picks, but I think if they were in last year's class, there'd be an argument that are they even QB6, which is where Bo Nix was, and we saw how great Bo Nix was as a rookie. And so I think if a team were to reach maybe in the back end of the first round, maybe we get Dart or a Ewers or a Milroe there. I have my doubts. I think it's more likely mid-day 2, talking end of second round, early third round. That's kind of where I see Dart going. But as we know, the NFL will reach on quarterbacks because they need them. And in a class like this, it makes even more sense for them to reach. And that's why I think it makes sense that a guy like Dart is declaring for the draft this year instead of going back, because there's just not very many talented quarterbacks in this class.
The other Ole Miss guy that, if you said was going to get drafted highly, that most people would circle is Walter Nolen, who, we use the term make some money. He made a lot of that this year with the way that he played. I think he also answered whatever questions there were about him from an attitude standpoint. I know that coming into the season there were some thoughts on that. Where do you see Nolen going in this draft? Can he get into the top 10 with a good postseason, a good pro day and things like that?
Well, I'm almost surprised there's not more buzz about him, because over the summer, when he transferred from A&M to Ole Miss, he was in that top 15 discussion. And then I'm with you. I think he did everything to check every box, especially with there was a couple of rumors, like you said, about attitude. And from every thing I've heard, he's been great at Ole Miss. You watch the tape, he's a freaky athlete. The production's there. The athleticism for an interior defensive lineman really pops. He's going to be at the Senior Bowl too, and I think he's going to make a lot of money there. And in a class like this, I think the only thing working against him is the defensive line group as a whole is the strongest in this draft class. But I still think he's definitely going to end up going in the top 25, especially with the numbers I expect him to put up at the combine.
So is it a defensive line across the board, or is it specifically tackle that's as deep?
It's D-line across the board, edge rushers and tackles. I mean, Ole Miss has a pair of edge rushers who I think both end up going top 100 on top of Nolen on the inside.
So, and speaking of them, so Princely and Jared Ivey is who you're referencing. Where do you expect they fall, and did they improve their stock, especially Princely being the 1 year rental, as we say? How much improvement, or did they improve their stock this season?
So Princely's an interesting one because if you just watch him rush the passer, you watch his 10 best pass rushes this year, you think, well, that's a first round pick. He is a freaky guy. He bends around the edge. He's so flexible. But again, it's the consistency with him. It's what can he do as a run defender. Another guy who's going to be at the Senior Bowl, and those type of guys with the freaky athleticism and the ability to bend the edge tend to shine at the Senior Bowl. So I think he ends up going on day 2. I don't think he'll sneak into the first round, but I think top 75 for sure. If he tests really well, maybe top 50. I was a big fan of him at Florida, and I think you saw exactly why at Ole Miss with that kind of rare first step and that ability to bend the edge, which every NFL front office is looking for. But I actually think it's Jared Ivey who goes earlier in the draft. I'm a huge Jared Ivey fan. I remember watching him when he was still at Georgia Tech and him popping. The NFL loves massive defensive ends who can create power, which is exactly what he does. He can play up and down the line. You see him align as a 2-tech, as a 4-eye. Doesn't have that same explosiveness as Princely, but he's 6'6", he's 285. He's going to have 34-inch plus arms. And he's a really mean run defender. He kind of reminds me of Keon White when he went in the second round to the Patriots a couple of years ago. He didn't quite crack that first round, but I think Ivey's going to dominate the Senior Bowl. I think he's going to test better than people expect, and his frame is just crazy.
Let's switch the focus from the college side to the pro side and keep it local. The Saints are drafting 9th in this draft. That's a team with a lot of holes, a lot of questions. If the draft goes the way you think it's going to go, who would the Saints be looking at the 9 pick?
A team like the Saints, it's like you said, there's so many different directions they could go. I tend to lean offensive line for them. It's not a great offensive line class, but if a Will Campbell falls to them, that's a safe bet to take. Right, they're still trying to get over Brian Ramczyk. He'd be a nice replacement. He also, some people project him inside to guard. There's also both Texas tackles are interesting, Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams. If Ohio State's Josh Simmons coming off the torn ACL, if he's going to be ready for the start of the season, I could see him sneaking into the top 15, maybe even the top 10. But just with this class in general, with a team like the Saints where there are so many holes, I tend to always lean strength of the draft, especially when it's a premier position. I know the Saints have drafted a lot of defensive linemen in the last couple of years, but I don't think you can go wrong loading up on defensive linemen. So that's another possibility there too. With like if a Mason Graham fell to them, pair him with Brian Brzee, that's pretty scary. So I just tend to always lean build in the trenches first.
During the break here from a listener, he said, I'd like to hear a comparison between Jaxson Dart and Matt Corral in regards to skill set and NFL potential.
That's a great question. And I was actually thinking about it before I came on, just thinking how different Dart is compared to Corral or Chad Kelly, guys with those rocket launcher arms and maybe lacking in other areas. I think Dart is almost the opposite, where he is so smooth mechanically. He's a good decision maker. the accuracy is pretty consistent at each level. And kind of my biggest thing on him is he has a fine arm. It's not a bad arm. He just doesn't have that kind of, oh my goodness, arm, and the ball doesn't quite jump out of his hand like it does with some other quarterbacks we've seen in recent drafts. But that's why I think Dart has a really high floor, and that's why I think he has a really good shot to be that quarterback 3 over guys who I think you could deem more boom or bust, like a Milrow or like a Ewers. Dart, I think, at worst, sticks around in the NFL as a quality backup for a decade because that floor is so high.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that people kind of make fun of, right? But I remember during an Ole Miss Pro Day years ago, Mike Tomlin reportedly was not only walking around the facility asking custodians and stuff like, "Hey, what do you think about this player and this player?" But like even around town, like you had representatives from NFL teams talking to bartenders, like, "Hey, have you interacted with this player? What's he like?" Jaxson Dart's going to win those kind of conversations of the, what are you like away from football? The further he gets from games, I think the more teams are going to like him because of that kind of stuff.
Well, and that's the other thing that I think is a bit of a misconception about what NFL scouts really do. I think at this point, they're probably 25% of their job is actually watching the tape, and the other 75% are character checks, going to the towns these players play in, getting a sense of who they are. Because at the end of the day, most of the guys who are being viewed as draftable players are all generally pretty freaky athletes, generally have that baseline skill set you need, and that the real difference for a lot of guys who make it or don't is that character and who they are. And so I think if Dart's checking those boxes too, especially at quarterback, that makes a huge difference too. That it makes it so much easier for a scout to sell the GM on this kid has the right stuff.
I'm pretty sure the answer to this question is no. You can feel free to just make it a one-word answer if that's the case. Mississippi State and Southern Mississippi, did they have any players that are on any NFL draft radars at this time?
The answer is no, but and not to rub salt in the wound of Mississippi State fans, but man, Kevin Coleman was going to be a dude. He hit the portal. I think he's expected to go to Missouri.
Missouri, yeah.
Yeah, so he was the one guy when I was watching Mississippi State that I thought, wow, that's an NFL player. Started his career at Jackson State playing for Dion too. So, but not this year, unfortunately, for either of those programs. I don't think.
Were you surprised that Coleman decided to do another year in college? Did you not feel like he could have gotten a good enough draft grade to go ahead and come on out?
I think part of it is he probably would have been a late day 3 guy, and I think he honestly has the talent to be a top 100 guy. So getting to a program, I guess, that he thinks is a couple notches above Mississippi State, especially with Missouri losing Luther Burden, losing Theo Weiss, he's going to step in and be that number 1 wide receiver for potential top 25 SEC team. I think that makes sense as to why he went back.
One interesting position in football is defensive back, because a guy can be dominant and be completely quiet. I mean, he can record no stats and have a dominating game because teams don't even focus in his direction. There were times where it felt like that was Trey Amos for Ole Miss, where he would have a game where you wouldn't say his name once because teams wouldn't even attempt to throw in his direction. Is that his reality, though? Is he that kind of defensive back, and where do you think he's going to fall here?
So my 2 favorite Ole Miss prospects to watch this year are probably him and Jared Ivey. Amos was a guy too when he started out at University of Louisiana and then transferred to Alabama, and I thought he would be an instant impact guy for them. Didn't quite carve out that role. Ends up at Ole Miss this year, and then you really see it all come together for him. I think he's another guy who could be a top 50 pick. He's not like a freaky athlete, but he is so technically sound. He's so balanced in press coverage. He's a little stiff in the hips, but has like really, really clean footwork, rarely takes a false step. And his eyes in zone coverage, I think, are really impressive. You'll see him kind of jump down on slants and stuff constantly and break passes up. I think he's definitely one of the best senior corners in this class, and another guy who's headed to the Senior Bowl, and I think will have a really good week.
And another listener on the text line asking us about J.J. Pegues, a guy that started his career as tight end. You mentioned the defensive line class is really, really deep. He was a great college player, but is he falling behind like that tier one of defensive tackles? Where does he fall in your opinion?
Well, I'm actually surprised that he has yet to get or at least accept an invite to either the Senior Bowl or the East West Shrine Bowl. I think he'll end up at one of them because he's a quality enough player to be there, and especially when you're that big a nose tackle and you're that nimble and you're you're athletic enough to be moonlighting as a offensive player. He's a guy who I quite like as a day three guy who kind of just eats space, plugs up gaps. I'm hoping he gets an invite to either the Shrine or the Senior Bowl because I think he should. Um, Not quite on that top 100 level for me. You can kind of see the difference between him on pass rush downs versus a guy like Walter Nolen, where it's that dude is a NFL starter day one. But I'm a big fan of him.
Let's go back to the pro side of things for this one. And another team that obviously has a lot of local interest, a lot of national interest, of course, the Dallas Cowboys. Another team with a lot of holes. Dak Prescott is in there, so quarterback probably not the way they're going to go. Where do you see the Cowboys looking in this draft?
Obviously, we got to see what they do with the head coach. Right now, though, if Ashton Jeanty is there, I think they should just take him. Assuming Dak is healthy and ready to go. I know Rico Dowdle had a nice year and kind of finished the season on a good strong streak, but Jeanty's such a game changing running back, and I think he is as good, if not better, a prospect than Zeke Elliott was coming out of Ohio State. And obviously, the Cowboys happily took him early. So if Jeanty's there at 12, I think that's a guy who's like has that Alvin Kamara impact as a pass catcher, but is built like a truck. He reminds me of a Maurice Jones-Drew kind of in his prime when he was an All-Pro, just with the stockiness, the contact balance on top of having this wicked burst for a running back that is 5'7", 215.
We talked about the quarterbacks and how there's so few for so many in this draft. Titans pick first. That's a team you think would want to grab a quarterback. Are they going to pull the trigger on Sanders or Ward, or do they try to trade down and figure it out from there? If not, where does the first quarterback go in this draft?
So I think they do end up going quarterback. The rumor I saw yesterday is that they're big fans of Cam Ward, which actually kind of surprises me because Callahan came from the Bengals where they have Joe Burrow, and Ward's not that same style of quarterback at all. They're almost polar opposites. But I do think ultimately the Titans land on one of Ward or Sanders. Ward, if they want that huge upside, the rocket launcher arm, kind of that run around off platform style that I have some questions about how he'll work in structure in the NFL. And I think Sanders is actually the safer bet because he plays a lot more within the structure of the offense, gets the ball out of his hand quickly, is less of running around and making plays when they break down, because you just can't do that consistently at the NFL level unless you're Patrick Mahomes. So I think Sanders makes more sense for what I assume the Titans want to do, but apparently they like Ward, and Ward does, I guess, have more first round traits in terms of that arm talent. But ultimately, I think trading back in a draft like this makes sense, or just taking Travis Hunter.
Simple enough.